All right, what's going on, everyone? We're going to jump into a Ukraine update here, talk quickly about some moves on the battlefield. There haven't been a lot in the last week, but we'll hit on those. Biden's visit to Ukraine, Putin's speech in Russia, and Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner group, kind of ruffling some feathers around what's happening at Bakhmut. Before diving into that, though, if at all interested, I posted a video yesterday, a chat I had with Ryan Hendrickson, who leads not just leads, he is the Tip of the Spear landmine removal organization. Ryan is ex-U.S. Army Special Forces, combat engineer, a handful of deployments, wounded himself digging up IEDs in Afghanistan, and he's been over to Ukraine a handful of times now, going back in April, where he is demining civilian areas, or what are now civilian areas. So he's digging up mines laid by Ukrainians and mines laid by Russians. He doesn't care. He's just trying to make areas safe for the innocent civilians that live there. Ryan's doing some awesome, unselfish work, literally putting his life at risk over and over again for people he has never met and for a lot of people he never will meet. So again, that video went up yesterday, and I'll put a link to Ryan's channel and his website below. He's someone worth keeping up with. All right, but moving on to the battlefield. I posted a short video earlier this week, and I will link in the description to an analysis by Michael Kaufman, who put out a long thread on Twitter and had a good podcast on War on the Rocks, I thought, talking about how what we're seeing right now is actually the Russian offensive in Ukraine, a winter offensive, if you will. He talks about how the majority of the fighting, which I think most would agree with this, is happening in 5 major areas, moving south to north: Volodar, Marinka, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and Kreminna. I personally really like Michael Kaufman. I think he's very measured in his analysis and doesn't put out clickbait, doesn't give hot takes just to try to draw attention. So when he does make predictions, it's interesting to see what they are. I'm sure you can find plenty of stuff he's gotten wrong. Everyone has, but overall he comes across as very professional. That doesn't mean that he gets everything right, not by a long shot, but to me at least, he's in the category of people worth listening to when it comes to this war. Anyways, big picture, Kaufman's analysis is that all of these different areas being attacked, some which are new, like Volodar, really started about 3 weeks ago, but places like Marinka and Avdiivka and Bakhmut, the fighting's been happening there for months. So it's not crazy that there hasn't been very much progress. He thinks, and I think this is probably a pretty fair assessment, is that Russia is kind of probing, in a sense, to see where they can make some sort of breakthrough or where they can make some sort of minor advance, at which point they will commit more of their reserves to that part of the front. So rather than all in on one axis of attack, there's multiple. They're going to see what plays out and take it from there. That sounds a lot more likely than what I think a lot of people have been waiting for, is this big blitzkrieg type attack where Russia breaks through the Ukrainian lines, or tries to, in some sort of major maneuver like we saw at the beginning of the war. But that's not what this war has been, and we really haven't seen that since the opening really few weeks of the war, almost a year ago, where Russia made substantial progress in multiple directions all at once. It's just a very different fight at this point. So I'd be surprised if Russia went kind of all in on one big hammer blow in Kreminna, or just Bakhmut, or just Volodar, or something like that. So if this offensive is just an increase in attacks in a handful of areas to continue to try to grind down the Ukrainian military, that wouldn't be crazy. That's really what we've seen, at least since this last summer. But to hit each one of those locations real quickly here, not a lot of movement around Volodar. Russia did make some progress 2-3 weeks ago. It hasn't changed much in the last week. Marinka and Avdiivka, that really hasn't changed much at all in terms of territorial control in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Around Bakhmut, Russia is continuing to make progress, looking like they're trying to encircle the city from the north. I'll put up some side-by-sides here so you can see how much territory Russia has gained around Bakhmut. It's not insignificant, but the M03 that runs to the north side of Bakhmut, it shows that now that's under Russian control. I think that was under Russian fire control for a few weeks now, so I don't believe Ukraine has been using that to move forces in or out of the city. And finally, moving up north around Kreminna, there's been a lot of talk about attacks and counterattacks in this region, but in terms of the maps that I'm looking at, not a lot has changed, again, in terms of territorial control. All right, moving on Monday, February 20th, President Biden traveled to Ukraine in a surprise visit, and I had kind of 2 big takeaways from this. The first is oh my God, that sparked so much domestic political anger. I saw on posts I made, on others, just any commentary, a lot of people were pretty fired up. I think it gave the impression, right or wrong, that Biden was prioritizing Ukraine and the people of Ukraine over the people of the United States. I have noticed there's been more backlash recently in the United States against continued aid for Ukraine, and I think this is one of the events that kind of brought it out even more so. Just a gut feeling in conversations I have with people, friends and family, people that aren't really tied in with the conflict, aren't spending a lot of time involved or reading about or staying up with the war. I just have a feeling that the United States, the population, is shifting away from give Ukraine everything they need. I don't have anything to go off there other than just a gut feeling, but it did seem like this visit brought out a lot of anger in a lot of people. And that's dwelling on the negative side. I don't want to stay there. I do think it's a positive for anyone, and I made a video about this. Anytime you're involved with anything, I think it's positive to be there. The first step in leadership, in my opinion, is just showing up, because so many people don't. And if we're going to be involved in any way with what's happening during the war in Ukraine, I think it is important that our leaders are there at times and see what's going on, so long as it's done in a safe manner and it doesn't put one of our key military or governmental leaders at risk. If we're going to be involved, I think it's the right thing to, on occasion, have people there on the ground in Ukraine like this, conducting these visits. The second big thing that I took away from this was it drew a contrast between Putin and Zelensky in terms of who's visiting the battlefield. And I don't think Putin has visited even the Donbass, like the occupied territory, since this war began. I could be wrong, but I definitely haven't seen any photos or videos of him like at the front, which would be a little extreme. Even Zelensky, when he goes on some of these visits, he's not, dodging mortar fire in the trenches. So I wouldn't expect that. That would be over the top. But it is odd in a war of this magnitude, especially, for the leadership to not make some sort of appearance with the troops. Usually it's staged. Usually it's all fluffed up, and it's actually an area that's really, really safe, and the security measures are locked down ahead of time, and it's not announced, and the videos or pictures are released like 2 weeks later. There's all sorts of measures taken to make that as safe as possible, but there is kind of like a morale building, patriotism boosting piece to that. Propaganda. Heck, there's a lot of propaganda value involved in doing that. And it's surprising that Putin hasn't done that at all. Speaking of Putin, he did give a speech this week that I almost stayed up for. It would have been kind of middle of the night, my time, I'm Central Time. And I'm glad I didn't, because there just wasn't a whole lot there. I thought there was going to be more. And partially it was because it got hyped up on social media. But Russia did their fair share of hyping this up as well. There were pictures of signs going up all over Russia saying things like Russia's border ends nowhere, in relation to the speech on February 21st, or no turning back, or this will change everything. Those were really hyping this up to be something. And there was some speculation every time Putin talks, there's speculation of an additional mobilization. He's going to turn it into a counterterrorism operation. He's going to declare all-out war, something. And the biggest item you can really pull from this speech was that Russia suspended their participation in the START treaty, which wasn't really even that shocking. It kind of, to me, just sounds like another part of a breakup, if that makes sense. The U.S., NATO, and Russia are not getting along well. START treaty was something that in the past we'd cooperated on when it came to inspecting and kind of monitoring nuclear arms. We haven't for the last 2 or 3 years now. It's been suspended already due to COVID and then the war in Ukraine. So then withdrawing from it, it's not good. I don't want to gloss over it. Anything that prevents the likelihood or limits the likelihood of nuclear weapons being used is a positive. So, moving that away is not a good thing. But I just don't, this didn't really send shockwaves. I think if you're really looking for something, you could pin on this and say it was somewhat nuclear provocation, because it allows, technically, would open the door for Russia to expand their nuclear arsenal and for deploying more nuclear weapons. But I think it's far from like a very, very strong threat. It just seems like, again, part of the breakup. Finally, there's a little drama in the Kremlin or around the Kremlin. Yevgeny Prigozhin is the leader of the Wagner group, and it's his soldiers who have been doing the majority of the fighting around Bakhmut, which has kind of been the focus for a few months now, and really been an area that Russia has hung its hat on in terms of battlefield success really over the last 3 or 4 months. Now, Wagner is this private military company that's very heavily tied in with the Russian government, but also not officially part of the Russian government, but also kind of is. They rely pretty heavily on supplies, transportation, medical. All of that comes from the actual Russian military. And Prigozhin, just yesterday, I'll link to some of these Telegram posts in the description, came out hot yelling at the Russian leadership, saying that they are deliberately withholding ammunition from his Wagner forces. He posted a picture that I'm not going to show in the video, but I'll link to it below if interested, of probably, it's hard to count, 50, 60, 70, maybe more dead Wagner soldiers stacked up or laid out. And he said that that number would have been 5 times less if Russia had provided just the basic supplies that his men needed. On top of that, he posted a picture of a memo he submitted on February 17th to the Russian Ministry of Defense requesting ammunition, and he showed what he requested for a 10-day allotment and what they actually received. And at the top one here, they requested 105,660 rounds of something. They received 3,600. Now it's back and forth. There's some here where they actually received more. Here they requested 420 rounds. They received 565. But other times they requested 1,340 and they got 0. So overall, it looks like they're getting a lot less ammunition than they want to carry out this fight. And Prigozhin went so far as to say that the deliberate withholding of this ammunition from the Wagner group was an act of high treason. Now, I'm not going to pretend to have the slightest understanding of like internal Russian domestic politics and what's going on there, but for Prigozhin to come out and accuse Russian generals of treason and kind of throw in their face that they either can't or won't supply some of these people that are dying on the front lines, that's a bold move. There have been rumors as of late that more and more regular Russian troops are kind of taking the positions of where the Wagner fighters were, but either way, the Wagner group has made up, estimates are all over the place, but on the low side, probably 30,000. On the high side, 60, 70,000 total soldiers in this fight. It's a big force. So to see this sort of rift is definitely something worth keeping an eye on. But that'll do it for now. Hope you're having a great week. We'll see y'all next time.